All right, guys, good morning and welcome to team. Time to get started. This is week 17 out of 24, so we're moving our way right through the team year. It's been a great year so far. One of the fun years. We've had, all the years are fun, but it's been a great year. Want to start off at asking you, it's a big game weekend, Super Bowl weekend. Got a couple questions for you, like little surveys. First, just about the game itself. How many of you are hoping the Broncos win? I figured that's what it was going to look like. How many hope the Panthers win? It's funny, every year it gets polarized like that. So by and large, people want to see the old horse, Peyton Manning, make it to the finish line with the championship. That's going to be a tall order, but it'll be interesting. How many of you are going to be, let's see, the two options are going to be watching a home just by yourself or watching with a group somewhere at a party? Home by yourself? That's me. Group at the party? All right, about half and half. All right. I was going to ask some question about prop betting, but I don't think I'll do that in this setting here. So, the only other announcement I have is our couples event, which is tomorrow evening. I've been telling you about it for about a month, and it's very close to sold out. We're having to cap it at 700 people, 350 couples. It's the biggest we've ever had, which makes me kind of upset because I'm pretty convinced it's only because my brother's also going to be here, which that sort of ticks me off to tell him we have the highest attendance because you're here, you know. So, but if you have not signed up yet and you really want to, you can try today. And if you get capped and it tells you can't sign up, you didn't hear it here, but we will take a few walk-ins. Because there's a little wiggle room there, but don't count on that. But try to sign up, and if you can't, you can hope to walk in, and we'll let you in, and hopefully that will go well for you and your significant other. All right, here's the story for today. Two buddies are hunting in the woods when one is bitten on the rear end by a rattlesnake. I'm going to go into town for a doctor, the other says, so he runs 10 miles to a small town, finds the town's only doctor who is busy delivering a baby. The doctor says, I can't leave to help you, but here's what you do. You take a knife, cut a little X where the bite is, and suck out the poison and spit it on the ground. The guy runs all the way back to his friend, who by this time is in agony. He goes, what'd the doctor say? He says you're going to die. So, didn't get the end of that quite right, but we are talking about, at the end of the day, the legacy of a man's life. And we've talked about what a man's true legacy is. In fact, just this morning, driving here from house, I heard a sports talk show, and they're talking again about, does this game impact Peyton Manning's legacy as a football player? Every day they ask the same question, legacy, legacy, legacy. And of course it doesn't, but people want to ask the question. And I always want to say, well, Peyton Manning's legacy as a father is 100 times more important than his legacy as a football player. I think he's got 3 young children. But legacy, what do we leave behind of any importance? Last week we talked about the legacy of marriage. It was a great fun to have my father here. Thanks for treating him so well. He really enjoyed it, and I told him that as long as he's able and can maintain a train of thought, maybe once a year we'll get him up here and talk about something, because he has some wisdom about anything, and it'll be really fun to do that, so thanks for treating him very well. Today we're talking about, well, thank you. I'll tell him you guys responded well. We're talking about the legacy of service, which I didn't really intend it this way, but it's appropriate to have this follow right after the legacy of marriage because there's an application there. But it's also a wider application, which I'm going to try to get into today. So let me read this text for you. It's in your booklet, and then we'll try to, actually, no, let me back up. I forgot the movie clip. Legacy of Service. So the clip I'm going to show you is from a Clint Eastwood movie, Pale Rider. I don't know if we've had a Clint movie yet this year. Some of my favorite. And this scene is a little longer than I usually show you. I thought I'd clipped it a little bit so it'd be close to 3.5 minutes, but this is about 5 minutes long, so it's a little bit longer, but I think you'll enjoy the whole scene. You have to get the context of the whole scene. He's in this, he comes to this, the Clint Eastwood character comes to this small mining town that's being dominated by this other miner named Lahoud, who's taken over things, and he's forcing people off the territory to try to get all the gold for himself. And he comes in though, and he's a preacher. So Clint is playing a preacher, come to this small town, and he offers a rather unique kind of service, legacy of service. So take a look.
Isn't there any law around? Someone you could take your case to?
Oh, even if there was, LaHood would own them like he owns everything else. And there's not much law a man could do, even if we had one. Because LaHood, he ain't really killed anyone yet. Meg's grandpa's heart gave out, and I've been sort of taking care of Sarah and Megan ever since. It ain't that we're living in sin. And it ain't that I don't want to marry the woman. It's just that one day, a few years back, her husband, Megan's father, he let out on her. And left her with a half-grown child. And since then, getting her trustful of a man has been, well, you know, it ain't been easy. But when we do get hitched, how about you doing the hitching?
Well, if you're waiting for a woman to make up her mind, you may have a long wait.
Yeah, I guess so.
Meantime, why don't you put me to work?
Oh, no, I couldn't ask you to, well, I mean, you know, maybe if there's something spiritual.
Well, the spirit ain't worth spit without a little exercise. Now, you tell me where.
You see, it's like, this rock and me, you know, we have a kind of agreement. I'm gonna do it in, or it's gonna do me in.
Well, I'd hate to lay odds on who's gonna win that one.
Yeah? Well, you know, I thought of drilling it and blasting the son of a gun, but, you know,
That would wreck the stream, wouldn't it?
Yeah, dam upstream be the end of everything.
Well, there's plain few problems can't be solved with a little sweat and hard work.
Oh, Mr. Preacher? Somebody's coming.
You recognize him?
The one on the left is LaHood's boy, Josh. The other one, I ain't never seen him before.
Barrett? Megan? Friend of yours, Barrett?
Yep, he's our new preacher.
Preacher, huh? Hey, you messed up some of my boys, Preach.
Nothing personal.
I hope you won't take it personal when we tell you to get out of Carbon Canyon now.
Well, there's a lot of sinners hereabouts. You wouldn't want me to leave before I finish my work, would you?
Well, done now, Preacher?
Part of it leastways.
like how he helps them at the end. There's a funny line that comes after that too. I really couldn't show here if you know. The one guy with the big eyes goes, "Preacher my," and then it's very funny. And that one's got marriage in it, waiting for a woman to make up her mind. It's got preacher in it, and it's got service in it. What else could you ask for in a clip? They just don't make movies like that anymore. Look at this text from Matthew chapter 20, a story from Jesus' life right after he's called the 12 disciples to follow him. Let me read it for you, and then we'll talk about it. Then the mother of the sons of Zebedee, now the sons of Zebedee were James and John. They were fishermen that Jesus had called to be among his earliest disciples. This is his mother. Came up to him with her sons. Notice that. The boys are with her. They're young men, but they're grown men. And kneeling before him, she asked him for something. And he said to her, "What do you want?" She said to him, "Say that these two sons of mine are to sit, one at your right hand and one at your left, in your kingdom." Jesus answered, "You do not know what you're asking. Are you able to drink the cup that I am to drink?" They said to him, "We are able." He said to them, "You will drink my cup. But to sit at my right hand and at my left is not mine to grant, but it is for those for whom it has been prepared by my Father." And when the 10 heard it, the other 10 of the 12 disciples, they were indignant at the two brothers. But Jesus called them to him and said, "You know that the rulers of the Gentiles lord it over them, and their great ones exercise authority over them. It shall not be so among you. But whoever would be great among you must be your servant, and whoever would be first among you must be your slave, even as the Son of Man came not to be served, but to serve, and to give his life as a ransom for many." All right. First thing we see here is the desire for position. The desire for position. My dad, as I told you last week, just retired kind of finally after 65 years of ministry, most of it full-time, the last few years part-time. Almost all of that time in local churches, like our church here, often a little bit smaller churches. So he's just a wealth of stories. And my brother and I love to hear him tell stories. My boys like to hear him tell stories. And he can stand up here for hours and just tell story after story of people and ministry and good, bad, ugly, all the stuff. But a couple of them that are my favorites, he once helped the father of a college girl. The family was going to our church. The father hardly ever came, but his family came. And in the middle of the night, got a call and drove with his father from where we lived outside New York City to Boston to rescue his daughter from a cult that she was living in. And they went into this house with the police standing outside and physically carried a girl, college-age girl, grown woman, out of a house, threw her in a car, and drove all the way back home. He helped her do that in the middle of the night. He once went with a woman in the middle of the night to confront her husband, who thought she was still out of town. He was actually having a sleepover at another woman's house in town. She called my dad. They went in the middle of the night to this house, knocked on the door, and the end of the story was, caught red-handed, and the woman who was the wife, who was upset, went in the house and saw some of her own stuff in the house. This guy had taken like the TV set and other things into this other woman's house, and his wife then started throwing it out. She was throwing it out of the front door onto the front yard in the middle of the night with a cop out on the driveway. But one of my favorite stories is a guy named Elwood Eicher, and I told part of this guy's story in a sermon a couple weeks ago. You might remember it. Mr. Eicher had been in this small church my dad was pastoring forever, had been an elder forever. That church, they called their leaders elders, all men. But he was kind of like the guy that Mark Twain called a good man in the worst sense of the word. Mr. Eicher was famous for, my brother and I thought he was famous for his, on Wednesday night prayer meetings, he would pray these long-winded, sanctimonious prayers about his wife. And his wife never came to church, but he would sort of confess his wife's sins at prayer meeting. "Oh, Lord, you know that woman you gave me, Lord? You know how mean she is? She's mean-spirited, Lord. She doesn't come to church anymore." And my brother and I would just be cracking up because it was constantly about his wife. That was Mr. Eicher. So when time came to nominate elders for the following year, my dad, pastor, didn't put Mr. Eicher's name on the list for elder. And when they had the meeting, the congregation didn't nominate his name either, so he was not elected as an elder. The very next week, he storms into my dad's office before church, before the service, and says, "Pastor, I want to know why I wasn't elected an elder." My dad sort of expected it, so he said, "Elwood, because you weren't nominated." And he said, "Why wasn't I," he's slamming his hand on my dad's desk, "why wasn't I nominated? I've always been an elder. I deserve to be an elder." That's what he said. And now my dad is one of the most patient people I know. But as you flip his switch And that flipped a switch, pounded on his desk. He got very firm. He said, hold on a second there, Elwood. Hold on. You deserve to be an elder? Now that's the problem. He said, you're the most obnoxious, arrogant, insufferable man I've ever met in my whole life. And you're not going to be an elder. I have to go to a service. And walked out and left him there. My dad thought he'd never see him again. Thought he'd never come back to church again. Now, two things. Kudos to my dad, because that's hard to do. Secondly, you need to know the rest of the story. To his credit, Elwood Eicher started to change. Nobody had ever confronted him before about his arrogance and his attitude, and he started to change. He became a little more humble. I think eventually, after several years, he returned to being an elder because he changed, which that's a good part of that story. Now, what this story in the New Testament tells us is the same thing that we see in Mr. Eicher. The story of James and John and their mother shows us the desire for position, the desire for a title, the desire for importance. It says, then the mother of the sons of Zebedee came up to him with her sons. Imagine bringing grown sons up to Jesus, okay? They're standing sort of behind their mom. And kneeling before him, she asked him for something, and he said to her, what do you want? She says, say that these two sons of mine are to sit, one at your right hand, one at your left, in your kingdom. Now, this is classic stage mom behavior, what we call today a helicopter parent. This is the mom who goes to the head coach and tells him that her son really should be the starting quarterback, okay? Imagine that. I once worked with a coach, a college basketball coach, who way years ago, I was his assistant, and after a game, a mom came up to him and said, hey, coach, congratulations on the game, but I think the way you took my son out of the game in the first half hurt his feelings. And he said back to her, just like that, well, the way he was playing was hurting my feelings, so I took him out. Great story. Now, her sons, James and John, are fishermen. And there's nothing wrong in that culture with being fishermen, but it was kind of seen as a blue-collar job. And they were never going to be people of position and power in the culture. But she had evidently heard something about Jesus being king, or that he was going to be some kind of a king. And so she sees an opportunity to get her sons in on the ground floor, in on the action, a chance to get position. Because position means significance. Position means status. I once had a young guy join our staff years ago, and after just a few months on the job, he came to me and sort of fumbled around about what he really wanted was a different title. He wanted to be called something different because his title didn't sound significant enough. And that told me something really important about him. And he didn't last around here very long. Position means power. Many years ago, I had a breakfast with a man I knew from church here. And I knew at the time that he was a CEO or something like that of a major Chicago company downtown. And so I knew it was going to be significant, so I dressed up. I didn't usually do this at the time, but I wore a shirt and tie and a jacket, and I was glad I did. I got downtown, all the way downtown to the city. Wanted to have breakfast at like 6:30 in the morning in the city. So I'm down there, and as I met him, he said, oh, before we go to breakfast, let's go. I want to show you our offices. So I was glad I dressed up. He was dressed impeccably, dark suit, power tie, white shirt, the whole deal. We walk into his, it had like 3 floors at the top of this big building downtown. And the first floor is where sort of like maybe 100 people were working in cubicles and all that. As we walk through, I'm walking with him, and everybody there knew who he was. He's the boss. Nobody knew who I was. And so as we're walking through, people were greeting him like he was the president. It was like, morning, Mr. So-and-so, morning, Mr. So-and-so. And they would greet me the same way, morning, sir, because they had no idea who I was. And it was really kind of fun walking through, and it was like the aura of power as you just walked around. It was kind of amazing. Then he took me up to the next floor, which is the executive offices. I think there were just like 4 offices on a whole floor, giant corner offices, view of the city, rich mahogany, leather-bound books. Everything smelled like money on that next floor. And there was a guy standing outside his office already. It's like 6:45 in the morning. Also impeccably dressed, beautiful tie. Everything about him said executive. He was outside his office. Now, he knows the boss, the CEO. He doesn't know who I am. As we walk up, and my friend is going to introduce me, before he even says a word, I can see a flicker of fear, just a very brief flicker across this guy's face, because he doesn't know who I am. I'm with the boss. For all he knows, I've just been hired, and I'm competition, or maybe I'm going to replace him. And I saw it just for a second, and as that fear, I was feeling good, as this fear went across his face, my friend goes, hey, this is my pastor, and everything just went away. It just completely ruined the whole thing. That same friend once told me, it's not about the money, he said. He said it's about the power. So deep within us, we all have this desire for position and for significance. We see it right in the New Testament. Next, we see the definition of greatness. The definition of greatness. If I asked you to make a list, if I passed around a piece of paper and said, let's make a list of the greatest men in the world today, think of the names that would be on that list. My guess is it would be similar to the names that we see on lists like Forbes magazine's list of the 100 most powerful people in the world, and we would naturally think of names like Obama, number 3 on the Forbes list, Putin, number 1 on the Forbes list 3 years in a row, Vladimir Putin, Donald Trump, Bill Gates, Warren Buffett, Pope Francis, number 4 on the Forbes list, Billy Graham, not on the Forbes list, but was on the list of the Time magazine's most important people in the 20th century. Or maybe we think of accomplished athletes, some of us are sports guys, Peyton Manning, Michael Jordan. We think of the powerful, we think of the rich, we think of the famous, we think of the influential, we think of the talented, because that's how most often we define greatness, and that's true. Those people are great by a certain measure, by a certain definition, but by these definitions, only a few can ever achieve cultural greatness. Those genetically gifted enough to be a great athlete, or those opportunistically become great businessmen or whatever. Only a few can achieve that. But Jesus redefines greatness in this passage, redefines it completely for us. But Jesus called them to him and said, you know that the rulers of the Gentiles, that's the Roman rulers and governors and so forth, lord it over them, and their great ones exercise authority over them. That's their definition of greatness, position and power. It shall not be so among you. He's talking to the 12 after this little conversation about make my sons great. But whoever would be great among you must be your servant. Whoever must be first among you must be your slave. Even as the Son of Man, that's how he referred to himself, came not to be served, but to serve and to give his life as a ransom for many. Jesus is saying that greatness is not found in position or titles or power. Greatness is found in service. Let me give you a few examples. Many years ago, when our oldest son was just a baby, there was a man in our church who I got to know early on in my earliest days here who had been around the church forever. Kind of like Mr. Eicher in my dad's story. Been around church forever. Had been here back in the 50s when the church was still downtown Geneva, part of moving it out here to South Street. And he had once been church chairman, maybe several times church chairman. Had held every position of influence in the church possible, and he was retired at that point. And frankly, he was a little intimidating. He was opinionated. He could be somewhat critical of leadership. He would stand up in congregational meetings and say point of order and all that. It was a little bit intimidating for me as a young guy. And I felt that way until one Sunday morning I had to walk underneath in the lower level of the East Campus to get something somewhere, and I happened to walk by where I knew my son was. Our only son at that time was a baby. He was in the nursery. So I just wanted to poke my head into the nursery to see if I could see him. I poked my head in, and here was this guy, the guy who I was a little bit scared of, who had been everything that, in the church, and he was sitting in a rocking chair, holding my son, rocking him to sleep. He was serving in the nursery. And I got tears in my eyes, and I thought, holy smokes, I had this guy totally wrong. I saw him as position, power, a little scary, a little intimidating, but he had a heart of a servant. He was rocking my son to sleep. Changed how I looked at him from then on, because he was a servant. That's greatness. There are men in this room who have served. There's actually a group right now in Mexico serving the local church down there. There are men in this room who have been on trips like that, mission trips. Men have spent hours serving at Riverwoods, putting stuff together so those kids can have camp. Jesus would say that's true greatness. A lot of you know we have a ministry here at church called Buddy Break. It's one Saturday a month. A bunch of families come to this West Campus, families with children with special needs. And we give the mom and dads a 3-hour break. They go off and do whatever they want for 3 hours. We take care of all their kids, not just their special needs kids, but the other siblings as well. Like 100 people serving and doing that. Some of you guys here serve there at Buddy Break. I heard a couple stories recently from a recent Buddy Break that just touched me, and they exemplify servanthood. There was one young boy who's on the autism spectrum, hardly verbalizes at all. But in the week leading up to Buddy Break coming, the 2 words he said over and over again were Buddy Break, Buddy Break, Buddy Break, because he loved his time here at Buddy Break because of the man who volunteered to spend those 3 hours with him. There's another young man who's a little older, maybe early adolescent years, a lot of special needs, really difficult to handle. But there's one man who spends time with him, and now that special needs boy only comes if he knows that's going to be his buddy. That guy's going to be his buddy. Those 3 hours together are so special. Jesus would say that's true greatness. Or take Royal Family Kids Camp, offering a week of camp to foster care kids. Some of you are involved in Royal Family Kids Camp for a day or for a whole week. That's true greatness. Jesus says, if you want to be like me, among my followers, that's how we define greatness. Not position, not power, but with service. And that leads us to the legacy of service. The legacy of service. Just when I think I've heard all my dad's stories, I hear another one. And I heard another one this past visit that I can't believe he hadn't shared with us before, except that he's humble about this sort of stuff. Here's the story. Years ago, this is way back in the early 60s. My dad was a young pastor, and he had a small church in Akron, Ohio. And they had Vacation Bible School. I don't know how many kids, maybe, 20 or 30 kids come to Vacation Bible School at this small church in Akron, Ohio. And one of the little girls there at church heard about Jesus, and when invited, she gave her heart to Jesus. She prayed and received Jesus as Lord and Savior at Bible school. So my dad, being the pastor, the only person on staff there, maybe had a secretary or something, small church, he knew he needed to talk to the parents and explain to the parents what the little girl had decided, what that meant to become a Christian, what it meant to open your heart to Jesus. So he went to visit their home and had a nice visit with the mom and dad. And when he explained to them what had happened to their little girl, the wife was really interested, started asking questions. So eventually in the conversation, he said, would you like to make that same decision today? She said, oh, yes, I would. And so they prayed, and she became a follower of Jesus right there. And then he looked at the husband, whose name was Ray. He said, Ray, how about you? And he said, Pastor, I'd really like to do that, but I don't think I can. Well, why not? He said, well, because I'm afraid that if I do that, someone's going to ask me to read from the Bible, and I can't read. My dad said, well, that's okay. Don't worry about that. And a lot of people don't read very well. He goes, no, Pastor, you don't understand. I can't read at all. He was a grown man with a job in the early 60s, been through school, and was completely illiterate, did not know how to read. My dad sat there for a second, couldn't figure out what to do, and then he went, off the top of his head, he goes, Ray, tell you what, if you let me pray with you today to receive Jesus as your Savior, I'll teach you how to read. Had never done that before in his life, never taught anybody how to read. He had an English major in college, but he never taught anybody how to read. But that was the promise he made to this guy. The guy goes, okay, deal. They prayed, he became a believer, and my dad spent 2 hours a week for over a year and taught that man how to read. I'd never heard that story before. My brother and I go, you did what? You made that promise? You did that? You had all this other stuff to do, and you spent 2 hours a week for over a year? It just blew our minds. But that's servanthood. That's true greatness. That's humility. That's what Jesus was talking about. That's what he meant when he said, whoever would be great among you must be your servant. I think that's also what the church is supposed to be about. In the New Testament, the church is called the body of Christ. And so in a way, the church is to represent Jesus himself in the world. Question, is that how most people in our culture think of the church? I don't think so. I think the impression many people in our church, in our culture, have of the church is, for example, a bunch of self-righteous people who think they're better than everybody else. Some people think that, like Mr. Iker, a whole bunch of Mr. Ikers in church, okay? Some people think it is kind of irrelevant, kind of this old-fashioned thing that people do, a kind of out-of-date religion. I think some people think of the church as kind of a religious country club where people go to escape the real world, and on and on and on, all kinds of impressions. But I don't think of it as the presence of Jesus in the world. And that's a shame. I think the church is here for two reasons if you read the New Testament. First, to be a community of genuine faith where everyone is welcome, warts and all, failures and all, where the gospel then transforms lives through grace, forgiveness, and hope. That's the first thing. It's a community of people who are being redeemed and transformed. Secondly, church is here to serve the world. I believe the church exists for the world. The church exists for the people who aren't inside it yet. It's one of the only organizations that's like that because it's a living thing. When the church begins to exist only for itself, it starts to die, which is why 70% of the churches in North America are plateau or decline right now because they start to exist only for themselves and they start to die. Furthermore, I believe our credibility in the world hinges on service, what Jesus says in this passage. For example, we have a ministry called Shepherd's Heart. Some of you know what it is. It includes a food pantry-based ministry at the East Campus. We now serve over 800 individuals every month through our food pantry. People right from our Tri-Cities who are struggling to have enough food to eat. 800 people a month come to our food pantry. See, a lot of people in our culture have problems with organized religion for a lot of reasons, but no one has issues with caring for hungry children and hungry families. That's one of the reasons why we have Shepherd's Heart. I mentioned Buddy Break. A lot of people have confused opinions about Jesus, who he was, what he means, but no one's confused by serving children with special needs. That's our credibility in the world. Some of you serve in a ministry called Master's Hands, doing handyman work for single moms and for widows and for senior citizens, for the elderly. People have problems with the church, but nobody has problems with caring for the elderly. You see that? Our mission, service and compassion, brings credibility to our message, which is the gospel. Without service and compassion, our message means nothing to the world that we live in today. Our service makes the gospel visible, which is why Jesus says, whoever would be great among you, who call yourself my followers, must be your servant, even as the Son of Man himself came not to be served, but to serve and to give his life as a ransom for many. Jesus left a legacy of service and calls us to do the exact same thing, legacy of service. Here's the questions I want you to deal with around the table. First, was serving or ambition more important to you as a young man? Why? Was serving or ambition more important to you, and why? What were the models you saw growing up? What did you witness in your own dad? What were you taught about greatness? Secondly, what does Jesus' teaching on servanthood, true greatness, have to say to your role at work, whatever you do for a living, as well as your role at home, husband, father? So deal with those two questions, get some coffee, donuts. I'll wrap you up right before 7 o'clock. I'm available for prayer requests as well.